In this video, I want to talk to you about the Argonautica, which was a poem written in the 3rd century BC in Greek by a man we call Apollonius of Rhodes. Argonautica is the Greek title for it. In English, it's something like the voyage of the Argo, the sailing of the Argo, which is the name of the ship. This is the famous ship that set out with Jason as its captain to go to kind of the end of the world, through the straits of the Bosporus, to capture the Golden Fleece and bring the Golden Fleece back. The main goal of this voyage, it was commanded basically to get Jason out of the way because he was inconvenient at home, but it wound up making Jason into a major hero. This theme is this poem was written in late period for Greek literature, what we call the Hellenistic period, and that has a lot of differences to the earlier periods that we normally think about in Greek literature, and those have left their marks on the poem itself. For example, the poem, the way it treats religion and the way it treats the gods, it's a lot more allegorized. The gods are doing much less in the poem. They're not acting so much as they're being referred to and deference is being done to them and whatnot. And that's consistent with what's happening in this period where the gods are increasingly being viewed as allegories of dynamics in the world or in the human soul or whatever else. Another thing that's very interesting and unusual about this epic is as they're sailing to all these various places, they keep stopping into all of these civilizations that are on the boundaries of what the Greeks know. And Apollonius is drawing upon the cultures of those places, and there are lots of shout outs to those cultures, to the way they do things, to the way the land is and why the land is the way it is. He gives a lot of origin stories for what's going on with those cultures. And if you were a reader listening to this at the time, it's almost like someone going on the stage and saying, is there anyone from Indianapolis here tonight? Anyone from San Francisco? And I'm like, yeah, that's my city. That's kind of what's happening as the Argo is going to all these different places. But it's also recapitulating a lot of the journeys that the Greeks took as a people and a lot of important moments in their cultural past, this sort of as the Greeks are going back through this. And so it also serves as an origin story for this late Hellenistic culture, which really is an amalgam of a lot of different cultures and a lot of different types of folks who ultimately came to be called Greeks. Now, this voyage has got an incredible cast because obviously it's a boat, it's a ship, you need a crew to run the ship, and on this ship you've got some of the biggest names in classical mythology. Jason himself will he hasn't done anything yet, but he's going to be known, he's going to be a big, big deal after this voyage because he does capture the Golden Fleece. But also on this journey, you have Orpheus, who is the greatest musician who ever lived. He's not just a musician, he is an expert in mysteries. And so as the ship goes along, very often Orpheus will say, hey guys, I know about this place, this sacred grove or this cave, and if we go there and do certain rites, which the poet is not allowed to tell us about, then the gods will be favorable to our journey and it will help us to be successful. So you've got Orpheus there. You've got Peleus, the father of Achilles. You get Heracles, the biggest Greek hero of them all. He doesn't stay with them the whole way. He's got other epics to jump into, but he starts off the voyage with them and he stays with them for the first, I don't know, maybe quarter or third of the journey or something like that. Castor and Polydeuces, who are who are brothers of Helen of Sparta, otherwise called Helen of Troy, which is not really very accurate. So her brothers are there. Telamon, the father of Ajax the Greater, as well as Oileus, the father of Ajax the Lesser. The two Ajaxes are major figures in the Iliad and in the battle that happens before the walls of Troy. So if you're reading this as someone who's deeply aware of the mythology, as they're listing off who shows up and enlists to go on this voyage, it's a dream team. It's the Avengers. It is an unbelievable cast of characters going on this ship. Now, this epic was one of the most popular Greek epics in Roman times. Its popularity as a Greek epic was probably only eclipsed by Homer, and this was more popular in some quarters than even Homer was. Ovid was a deep admirer of this poem, and he drew upon it in actually multiple of his works, most notably in the Metamorphoses, which is his major work. Now, the Metamorphoses itself was going to become one of the most popular ancient epics in the Middle Ages, one of the few they had, and it was deeply influential on the medieval mind and imagination. There's a massive text written in Old French called the Moralized Ovid that talks through the Metamorphoses and gives allegorical readings of everything in the Metamorphoses, which was done largely to use it to convert it into principal material for preaching, right? You can always use these stories as examples in your preaching for how people ought to or ought not to live their lives. That text transmits the Argonautica and its stories to the Middle Ages. So in the Middle Ages, the influence of the Argonautica was indirect through the Metamorphoses, but because it was so greatly influential on the Metamorphoses, it wound up being also a major player in the Middle Ages, and we see it shaping their imagination, and we see them drawing upon the story, referring to Jason and Medea, and so on and so forth. But the biggest admirer of the Argonautica was a Roman poet named Virgil. There's a 500-page study that was published in 2001 by a scholar named Damian Nellis that details the influence of the Argonautica on the Aeneid. It's obviously a lot more than we could go into here, and there's obviously some discussion to be had about whether all of the things that Damien identifies are actually Argonautica references or not, but he has made a very compelling case that it is a massive influence on this work. It is a massive influence, and some of the things that are pretty undeniable are really important incidents in the Aeneid. For example, the entirety of Book 3, when you're getting the story of the Trojans' journeys, that's basically following the Argonautica almost like a blueprint. The relationship between Dido and Aeneas, which happens throughout the first half of the Aeneid, is heavily modeled on the relationship between Jason and Medea. And Carthage, where Dido is, sort of shows up as it's like another Colchis where Medea was. Aeneas' journey from Carthage to Sicily also follows the blueprint of the Argo's return voyage back to Greece. And there are many more likely borrowings here. Just looking at it on the level of structure, the Argonautica may have been a greater influence on the Aeneid than the Iliad and the Odyssey. I mean, I would even summarize it as saying that the Aeneid is largely built on the blueprint of the Argonautica, and then content-wise, a lot of borrowings from Homer as well. So it's a really important work for understanding what's going on with the Aeneid and why Virgil's making some of the choices that he's making. It was also very, very important in the Renaissance. They rediscovered the Greek text and were able to print the Greek text, and so people are now reading the original poem again for the first time in quite a while in the Renaissance, and they loved it. And so it became a major theme of visual art and also influenced a lot of Renaissance literature. Visually, artists like Michelangelo and Botticelli have produced famous paintings of scenes from the Argonautica, and it remains a major source of material all the way to the 20th century. We have some pre-Raphaelite painters painting important images of Jason and Medea. The first translation of the poem into English happened in 1780, and since then there have been 13 English translations of this poem. So it's a key link in understanding how the Hellenistic material was transmitted to Rome, and it's a key influence on the two most important classical Roman long poems, the Metamorphoses and the Aeneid, and it continued to be influential all the way through the 20th century. And now it's fallen off of our syllabi. So I would commend to you a rereading or a first reading of Apollonius of Rhodes' Argonautica.